I am Anthony Pascal.
And I am Laurie Elster. And this is the All Access Star Trek podcast. Today we're going to review Star Trek Lower Decks Season 4, Episode 7, A Few Badgeys More, because who doesn't need a few more badgies? But first, we've got big news, which you may have already heard us talk about.
Yes, we did the emergency special joint podcast.
So our first emergency special joint podcast happened when Prodigy was pulled off of Paramount Plus and sort of canceled in a temporary kind of way. And now we have the great news that Star Trek Prodigy is moving to Netflix. It's going to relaunch on Netflix. That means we'll get to see Season 1 this year and Season 2 next year.
And that's all we know. But we have fun talking about that and speculating with Kayla from the Shuttle Pod. So check your feed for that earlier podcast, which came out a day before this podcast.
Because we didn't want to say all the same stuff today.
Except we're happy. Yes,
we're definitely celebrating. It was a crazy day, and in the middle of it, we got this fabulous news, so that was nice. So the press release, this was the one from Paramount Plus, correct?
Well, no. So, yeah, it's a complicated thing.
Okay, yeah.
CBS Studios produces the show. Paramount Plus is out of the Prodigy business. So
Right.
They're not sending us press releases anymore. But it's some of the same people. So CBS Studios produced the show. They're happy that it's going to Netflix because they've been paying for it. Anyway, they sent out, a confirmation after it went up in Variety with all sorts of facts. And, just sort of buried at the end. It's like, there's on Paramount Plus, you could watch Strange New Worlds and Picard. And then it said that Section 31 movie with Michelle Yeoh and the Starfleet Academy series previously announced will be starting production soon.
Just a little tiny sentence at the end of the press release.
Yeah, but it's new verbiage. They haven't used that starting production soon thing, which is curious because technically they can't start.
Because there's still an actor strike going on.
It's funny, you're not hearing a lot in the media about the actor strike because the studios and the actors are no longer yelling at each other through the media.
Yeah.
They're actually talking to each other in closed rooms, which means, the less you hear means the less leaks, which means it's serious. This is exactly kind of the calm that happened before the WGA deal was announced. So I expect a SAG deal to be announced soon, or it just falls apart again and they go back to sniping. But I think by the end of this month, the SAG strike will be over.
Yeah, I'm hoping. I'm going to be optimistic and say I'm hoping within a week.
Data insufficient.
Hi, this is Anthony with an update from Thursday. When we recorded this podcast originally on Wednesday, things were going well with negotiations with the actors, but by Wednesday night, that had all changed. Negotiations have been paused, and they have gone back to sniping at each other in the media. So bear that in mind as you listen to the rest of our somewhat more optimistic view of where things are headed when it comes to production. Now, back to our original recording. I think that means that Section 31 could potentially go into production as planned in November in Toronto. I'm not sure what that means for Strange New Worlds, but apparently they're going to go for it at the same time. This idea that the Academy show is going to start soon, I think, it's one of those, it depends on your definition of the word soon. But it's not, I can't imagine it's this year. I know that something's happening. Work has been going on during the strikes that didn't involve writers or actors, including some pre-production stuff in Toronto.
But the writers haven't been back for that long. We don't know how quickly they got a room back together. We don't know any of those details.
Shows can start production before the full season is written. I mean, it used to be the norm, obviously.
Right.
And we've seen that on many, even on the new Star Trek shows, although Kiva Goldsman noted once that he wished they didn't do that with season 1 of Picard, because they would have done something different early on if they kind of had everything worked out.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's, it's possible, but I still don't see them starting to shoot that this year. But the fact that they threw that in there shows a level of confidence. I think some people are thinking, well, they had some time to rethink things. And
we talked about that possibility, that they might take time to rethink and reevaluate. But so far, I don't think that's what happened.
I mean, it's probably not. I mean, there's kind of a momentum and inertia to these things. In this era of belt tightening, they got Paramount Plus to agree to pay for the show. Going back to them now or having someone trying to change things, it's almost like once you start that idea of unwinding, maybe you actually don't get anything. So keep on track.
You mean from a secret hideout perspective?
From a secret
right?
hideout.
Yes. Okay. Right. They don't want to take any chances that anything's going to shift, because I've already been hearing stories of shows that have, that were going to be made and now are not. People had deals and they don't know.
There was an interesting comment by an executive from Paramount Plus at an event this week, kind of a big media event in France, I think. And she said that Paramount Plus is not going to be doing, at least in the US, which all of this would be, any more limited series, which I think is curious.
Yeah.
Because I love limited series, but they are doing this Section 31 movie. I wonder if they lump that in, like maybe this will be one and done, because the plan was this was the first of many. But I don't know if they mean that they aren't going to do things like that anymore either. So it's
yeah. The value of a limited series to me is that the storytelling can be really crisp, because your beginning, middle, and end. You don't have to leave a door open. You don't have to do all this other stuff. You can tell a complete story.
And we've seen it work. I mean, in the old days, they called them miniseries, and we loved them.
Yes.
They used to be huge.
They were huge. That was event television.
But these things cost a lot of money, and then you throw away all the sets when you're done. But Star Trek, they're so good at restructuring and, repurposing sets. Maybe that isn't really the case. Anyway, speaking of things changing, New York Comic Con is this weekend. By Friday, when this podcast comes out, it'll have started. We had talked about this before. Now there have been changes because the WGA strike is over. Mike McMahon, showrunner for Lower Decks, and
Alex Kurtzman,
the grand poobah of Star Trek, are going, and they're going to be on the panel that you're going to be at.
Yes, I am. I have a seat reserved and everything. So yeah, they're going to show a new Lower Decks episode. I've heard people saying they're kind of disappointed because there obviously isn't a lot going on, but we'll see how that's going to go. And then there is an opportunity, which I will be taking, to interview Mike McMahon, one of those roundtable things. So we'll see what we can get out of him.
With Alex there, it opens up the opportunity to make some announcements.
Discovery. I really want...
Right, a Discovery date, maybe other announcements, maybe about the Section 31 movie, to say, yes, we are going into production pending the SAG strike, and other stuff. Maybe finally we can get some news about that Nick Meyer audio thing, so who knows?
I feel like that's a long shot.
We need to know it's dead or alive.
Yeah.
It's probably somewhere in the middle, unfortunately. Speaking of dead or alive, very short treks. That felt like just kind of a promotional event for the 50th anniversary, and it probably was. There were 5 of them released. This week, there wasn't a new one, but they released kind of a behind-the-scenes featurette about the show, or it's not really a show, it's a series of promotional shorts with Casper Kelly and some other people talking about it. And it's some interesting insights into his, vision for the show. But he mentioned that 10 were written, and he really likes the other 5. And I'm unclear how much he was joking, but he said maybe next year.
Yeah, I didn't think he was joking. He seemed so serious about it.
I know Aaron wrote more than one.
Right.
So I think that's in that group of 5.
And they paid for people to write them. So we don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, they still have to make them. I mean, I was interested in watching this little featurette because I thought I didn't feel like I got more insight into anything. Like, I didn't feel like my questions were answered, or what the point of view was, or what the goal was. Or, he talked about loving the animated series as a kid, which I thought was kind of fun, but I wish he talked more about what he loved about it.
Well, he talked about how the style of the animation lent itself to, which he said he loved, but also noted how it lent itself to comedy, and which it did throughout. And you said throughout this whole thing that you loved how it was designed and how it looked.
Yes.
The issues were some of the storylines, and he talked a little bit about getting, all the cameos, and how George Takei was reluctant to do this. And so he wrote him this like loving but honest fan letter, which I thought was kind of sweet.
Yeah, and he was really happy he did it.
So maybe more very short treks.
I don't know. We'll see. The fan reaction was not good to the first 3.
But very good for 2 out of 3. So now they know what to do.
Or especially what not to do.
Exactly.
Speaking of things that are not getting done, how's that for a segue?
Nice. Excellent.
We have a little tidbit of information, just not even information, but just sort of atmosphere from the writer's room for Quentin Tarantino's Star Trek movie that didn't and isn't getting made. This is more interviews with Lindsay Anderson Beer, who was one of the writers, one of the original writers on Star Trek 4, but she was in the writer's room. This wasn't for the J.J. Abrams one. This was with Quentin Tarantino.
Well, it was J.J. This is the confusing thing, is they're all J.J. Abrams, right? Tarantino's project started when Quentin Tarantino walked up to J.J. somewhere and said, hey, I got this crazy idea for a Star Trek movie. And so JJ at that time was already working on a different Star Trek 4.
That's what I mean. It wasn't that one. It was a different one. So the one JJ was thinking of would have Kirk's dad.
Right.
Quentin's would not.
Right. So briefly, for a couple years, there were 2 active Star Trek projects going at Paramount.
And what was interesting about that room, she said that he asked all of them for their ideas. He listened. Then he took out his notebook and talked for 20 minutes. And he basically...
It's stuff he had written. He had written dialogue and stuff.
But she's right. She said not even a story so much as like ideas, thoughts, and lines of dialogue. And that he was really passionate, which of course is fully on brand for Quentin Tarantino and wonderful. And she thought it sounded exciting, what she heard. And that's kind of the last we've heard about it since.
Mark L. Smith, who ended up being assigned to write the screenplay, had mentioned briefly that he was in this room. So we knew that there was, they kind of formed a writer's room. By the way, this is, people hear writer's room and think TV. Writer's rooms for movies are not uncommon. They're often done at the beginning or late in the script, which some people call punching up. There's a lot of people in Hollywood who are kind of known for, Kevin Smith, gets brought into these things. In fact,
Carrie Fisher used to be a punch-up writer for a lot of screenplays.
Tarantino himself used to do it, which I think is one of the reasons he did this. And so apparently Lindsay Beer, the reason her journey to Star Trek is because she became known as being really good in these writers' rooms. In fact, Tarantino commented on it. That's when JJ met her. And that experience had him say, okay, when the Hemsworth movie fell apart later, he went back to her and said, hey, let's do Star Trek. Well, why don't you take a shot at it? And she did. And then she moved on. But that project is the one that's apparently possibly going into pre-production soon. Who knows?
Apparently, possibly.
Apparently, possibly, maybe quasi. There's also possibly another Star Trek project that has nothing to do with JJ that's, in contention. So we're still waiting. I don't think we'll get any announcements until after the SAG strike. But I expect a bit of news from Paramount by the end of the year. That's my prediction.
Okay. You usually have a good sense of these things.
Did I predict that they were going to Netflix? I think I did.
You did. You certainly did to me. Yeah. And there's some kind of movie vibe in the air because I had a dream with Chris Pine in it last night.
Isn't that just a regular occurrence?
No.
Oh, really?
But he was super cute. Just
for many people, it is.
Yes. That was my first dream with him, I think. Anyway, moving on.
Well, let's just do a quick roundup of this. Really isn't merchandise. It's more auction news. There's a guy named Greg Jein who worked on Star Trek starting in the 70s as a model maker, and all throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, he worked on all the shows and the movies building models for Star Trek. And his company built a lot of the models. He was nominated for an Academy Award. He's nominated for an Emmy for his work on DS9, I think.
He's a Hollywood legend. He's worked on all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. And he passed away last year. He was also an avid collector. He was a nerd. He was a sci-fi fan. So he has this incredible collection. I mean, there's an original X-Wing. There's an original model from Close Encounters. There's a ton of stuff from the original series. It's all going on sale this weekend. So if you get this on Friday, the podcast, Heritage Auctions is holding this, and there's hundreds of lots. And there's a lot of them are, some of them are just like the X-Wing is going to go for $1 million, but there's stuff that in the $500 range, like genuine uniform, like blue jumpsuits from TOS, things that have no bids on them. There's just so many lots. Now Shatner's hairpiece is already at $4,000. That's going to go up.
Spock's ears. They have Spock's ears.
Yeah, but there's plenty of stuff for the bargain hunters if you consider anything under $1,000. But like Gorkon's giant from Star Trek 6, he had that walking stick made out of a bone.
Oh, yeah.
I think that there's been no bids on it, or it's like $1,000, which is a lot of money. But imagine having Gorkon's bone in your house. That would be so cool.
Oh my God, my family would kill me if I started doing that. Here, I just spent thousands of dollars on props. I'd be like, great.
But like for $500, you could pick up one of those helmets from the motion picture, the kind of goofy. It's the closest thing to a real Space Fun helmet, but it's the time when Federation security officers had these kind of weird leather helmets that kind of look like old football helmets.
They looked very silly.
I hated them, but you could have one.
And then at least it's useful. No.
Yeah.
I mean, there's stuff in there I would love. It's just not in my budget.
Right. It's fun to just kind of peruse the gallery of old stuff.
Yeah. I
love looking at stunt stuff, like the stunt phase. There's the hero phasers and the stunt phasers.
Oh, yeah.
Because the stunt ones just look like shit, because they never were meant to be seen close up. So when you get a nice high resolution picture of one of them, because they're rubber and they're painted on,
right,
they just look terrible.
Looks very homemade.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I can't believe that someone actually held this on screen and we didn't notice it. Okay, so there's a couple of gaming things which Laurie doesn't care about, but I love gaming stuff.
I care that you care about it.
Okay. So there's actually a brand new Starfleet or Star Trek game coming out this week, by the time you listen to this podcast, it will be out. Star Trek Infinite comes out on Thursday the 12th. It's this grand strategy game. It's set in the TNG era. On the site, we'll have up video that kind of shows you how the game works, kind of a training video that's kind of fun. And the other thing is Star Trek Resurgence, a game I reviewed in May and just talked about how wonderful it is. This kind of narrative adventure game was released digitally in May. Now it's coming out in physical media for Xbox and PlayStation. That comes on October 27th. So they announced a pre-order bonus this week. So if you didn't get it the first time around, I just really recommend. It's like watching a season of Star Trek, a really good next gen era Star Trek. And if you're not a gamer, it's fine. You could easily play this game if you haven't played a game in years, or maybe never play a game, because it's a lot. It's basically mostly dialogue is really what it is.
Right.
There's some action. You do some scanning and firing phasers every once in a while, but it's mostly about the story.
That's cool. I don't have time to add video games to my life. I'm not looking for something else to take up hours and hours of time. Because if it's good, that's what you'll do.
We're just a few weeks away from Lower Decks wrapping up. And then we're going to get Discovery and then a lot of nothing. So hopefully people start rediscovering the books, the comics. There's recently they re-released the audiobook from A Stitch in Time from DS9. Andrew Robinson reading it. I mean, there's Star Trek content out there released this year that's worth checking out. And it'll fill your Star Trek itch, I think, hopefully.
Speaking of fulfilling your Star Trek itch, because I'm all about the segues today, how about a little Lower Decks?
This is another one of those episodes that it's almost a very short review. It was great. I loved it. Returning characters, lots of nods, classic stories, great guest stars, almost no notes. So we're done, right? That's it.
No. We have to talk about it. I will say I missed T'Lyn. I really felt her absence this week.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't bring it up last week, or did we? I can't remember. But
we didn't. Afterwards, we're like, should we have talked about the fact that there was no T'Lyn?
But T'Lyn, I mean, because we didn't love last week's episode. It was fine. It was good. But I still don't think T'Lyn would have made it better because they already had so much going on with everybody getting their own little story. I mean, that's the tough thing with T'Lyn is this one did these two great pair-ups that they haven't done before,
Yeah.
or they rarely done or never done.
I don't think I've ever seen Mariner and Rutherford doing something together.
And, you know, they were really split up. They're different locations. They're not even close to each other. Boimler and Tendi together. Both were fun. Both had their own interesting chemistry. And I get why T'Lyn isn't part of it, because that disrupts that dynamic. Maybe T'Lyn could have been part of the Cerritos story, like working with the captain or something.
I don't know. I felt like even Mariner didn't really serve the story that much, except I liked that she didn't let Rutherford go alone, and obviously knew that he was going to do that. So I thought that was a nice nod to her character and who she is. And she's the one who reminded him of what Tendi had said, which is what helped him save the day. But otherwise, Mariner didn't do a whole lot.
Rightfully so, because that was a Rutherford story. You know, I think I've said that bringing in T'Lyn has come at the expense of Tendi and Rutherford. Another reason why maybe it makes sense to not have her in this episode. This is, if anything, a Rutherford episode, although he really had no part to play in the Daystrom story, which was great. But I'm not sure you could say he has the A story, even though Badgey's in the title and he's kind of the Badgey story. There's really just two parallel A stories running, right?
I sort of think that if I had to pick, if you forced me, I would say that it was the Rutherford story.
Yeah, I mean,
the stakes were much higher.
Yeah, well, they couldn't get higher. Everyone in the galaxy was going to get killed.
Exactly.
Agnes and Peanut Happer, which I haven't got into, you know, the most he might do is subjugate a planet or two. But no, I think it was, you know, I guess you'll like this episode if you like the Badgey character, because it is, you know, there was not just one, but many Badgeys, or
multiple Badgeys.
Badgey variants. We had Badgey, Goodgey, and Logicy.
Yeah. Logicy.
He sacrificed himself.
It was the logical thing to do.
Jack McBrayer nailed it on each one of them.
In my notes, it says Jeffrey Combs, Jack McBrayer, superstars. Like, they were both so great.
You really can't pick which one nailed it more. Combs was more comedic, I would say. Badgey was funny, but also like compelling. And there was real drama. I mean, this whole story of father and son and the megalomania, and it really was heartwarming and funny. Whereas the Agama story was just kind of played for laughs. And it was very funny, I thought.
Yeah. Do you know what they had in common? Maniacal laughter. Like, everybody was doing their maniacal laughter. So Agamus did it, and Lord Tyrannokilicus did it, and Badgey did it. This same like at the end, and I was like, oh, that's what ties them all together.
Well, there actually was something. I mean, I'm not sure if it means anything, but the color blue. So you know, so I love the trick that Agamus has to strain himself to turn his light blue, but when Badgey became one with everything, he turned blue.
Yeah.
Because blue is good, I guess.
Well, we know red is bad from Prodigy, too. Red is bad.
Well, red is just always bad. Red is evil.
Yes,
you know, things
red
with
alert.
red lights.
Yep.
Gucci really wasn't blue. It was more
gray.
Silver, I would say. Whereas Badgey is supposed to be kind of gold, really, I think, right?
Yes.
Even though he comes off as just essentially yellow.
But he's gold.
You know, and just that how that story... All of that ties into V'ger. I thought there's a, you know, kind of a V'ger element at the end when Badgey accidentally comes upon this view of the galaxy.
Well, what I thought was interesting about that is that traditionally in Star Trek, when someone gets that kind of knowledge and power, they go bad. They instantly become bad and do bad things.
Right.
You know, Gary Mitchell, starting with him, but it happened with a lot of them. And so I thought this was a nice, different take, which is that if you really get all the information and all the power, then you realize, I'm sorry. Like he didn't look at people as ants or insignificant. He was like, oh no, I'm sorry. I'll just go somewhere else.
Right, to start his own universe.
Maybe visit the Q or the Black Mountain. Wherever he went, the koala was there.
Yes. Well, it was all a repeat of the guy who ascended in season 1.
Right.
O'Connor? I forget.
Oh, I don't remember his name. I remember his hair.
But he beat the arms and the bird, and then he flowed into the,
Yeah.
I love how Mariner wasn't sure. She's like, did you really accidentally become one with everything? Or is this just another trick?
Right.
Because they're all wary of the AI. I mean, rightfully so, wary of the evil AIs from the beginning. Mariner's like, when they go off and they're like, have fun with the sinister robots. And
yeah, who definitely aren't trying to trick you or trap you.
and Boimler, from the beginning, I thought what was interesting about his storyline is how he was leading Agamas along the whole time. They knew they could get away, but he wanted that intel. So they just kind of played along. They always knew they were going to be betrayed, and they were.
And they could escape, but they chose not to.
Well, and Tendi was having fun at the beach.
I know. She had her boots off. She had her little naked feet in the sand. She was so excited. And then she took some with her.
Why did a computer and an exocomp want to go to Martinique? This is so random.
Yeah.
Yes.
There are a lot of weird random things. Like when Agamas is like, is protesting being bound, being tied up. And I'm thinking, well, he can't move anyway. Like every time he needs to go somewhere, someone has to pick him up and take him. The only thing he could do was when he was depressed, he flopped forward and fell in the sand while Tendi patted him gently and his muffled voice spoke.
It was fun when they played with the AI, because they start in like AI penitentiary, which they hadn't called it before. It was just used to be called the megalomaniacal computer storage or something, but they now played up the whole prison movie thing. So there was like a yard, and there were computers lifting weights, playing basketball,
They got a movie watching Lassie with a computer on a picnic blanket.
But still, someone had to come in and pick them up. So I'm like, what's the point? Like, of the basketball and the weight, like, who's lifting the weights? So,
well, Peanut Hamper can move, but Agamas can't. So I guess it depends on what kind of computer you are.
The Agamas, well, now he has those. Well, he always had the drones before, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But there was something new. He said he's gone wireless, whatever that means.
Yes. He said he pretended for gardening. I told my therapist it was for gardening, but in reality it was for scheming.
Well, yeah. I loved all the talk between them of what's the point of forming a conspiracy anyway if you're not going to do it? He was so in love with scheming and conspiring and subjugating. Although in the end, he said, I don't need to subjugate. I've done that before.
Right. And she says, we can still be friends without vanquishing people.
Not something people say to each other, but
sure,
it makes sense within this context.
Sure. Although I did like Boimler's comment on the vanquishing. He goes, Starfleet definitely wouldn't be able to reverse this in an hour, he says sarcastically. And I'm assuming an hour is the length of an episode.
Right. It was true that they did a very fast job of vanquishing that planet. Those people were easily subjugated. I'm assuming Boimler going along with it, they weren't killing anyone.
Right.
Although they were just capturing them and making them worship them or something like that.
Right.
But he was bored by all of it because he didn't have his friend. I mean, it's kind of sweet. He formed a friendship, and Peanut Hamper was her least annoying yet in this episode. I think she was funny, and this ties everything together, because if you remember in the episode when she disappeared, which was the episode that Badgey was left behind as well, the season 1 finale, when they asked her to carry Badgey over to the ship, to the Pack-Leds, she said, no, I don't want to do that. I just joined Starfleet to piss off my dad. Right. So
Kevin.
This is all, Kevin, exactly.
Her dad is named Kevin.
But he still only talks in beeps.
Right.
And Kevin lives at the same, that is the facility from Next Generation. The same, it was, they used the same design. It was the same name. It was all all that stuff.
Sure.
What else would they do?
Yeah,
But
exactly.
But they're good at that kind of tying everything together. There was some fun little blink if you miss it. As Badgey is becoming one with the universe, we visit some familiar locations.
Oh, what did you see?
Well, you may think it was the Cerritos, but there was a shot of the Vancouver quickly. Oh. And some of the people we visited when they visited the U.S. Vancouver. I think maybe Boimler's ex-girlfriend. There was Starbase One and Douglas Station. There's a Federation relay station. It's Deep Space Nine. Everyone will notice Deep Space Nine. That popped up for a second.
Yes.
And Talin's ship was in there, was in the mix.
Ah.
And then everyone will remember Badgey sort of emerging out of the Milky Way as some with maniacally laughing.
Of course, maniacally laughing.
Now, there was that moment where he realizes where things are and he splits into three different, and he talks about how he could see the past, the present, and the future.
Oh, yeah.
And this is one of those things where I never know if it's a reference or not, but it felt like a reference to that episode of Next Generation when Data split into three people. And We Always Have Paris. Remember that?
I don't.
There was three Datas next to each other, and they're talking to each other.
Yes. Okay, now I do. That's not an episode I rewatch, really. That's funny. But now I remember it.
It may or may not be a reference. It's impossible to tell with this show. Some things are obvious. Some things are just maybe coincidences.
Yeah. No, that's interesting.
This episode was making more references, I think, to itself, really, which has become more common this season.
Well, they've got a lot to build on at this point.
Yeah, I mean, obviously last week they played a lot of fun with the first episode with Voyager, and then with DS9 and the Ferengi in the last episode.
Yeah.
But in general, this season has been light on the eggs and more on their own self-referencing. Badgey, Agamus, and Peanut Hamper and the Drukmani are all Lower Decks creations. Although that Drukmani captain isn't the same one played by J.G. Hertzler. It's hard to tell what Drukmani from the...
I know, they all kind of look the same. Well, you know what I finally got a sense of was what you were talking about last week, because now I'm noticing it. It's like, oh, the shuttle that they're working on is an ongoing thing now. It's like the Grappler Test 85 or something like that. But now I was like, oh, I never connected the dots on that, and now it's like, oh, they've been doing it the whole time. So you're right. I can't wait to see what happens when they finish whatever it is they're doing with the shuttle.
Well, I think part of the gag is that they'll never finish it. I think maybe they'll use it in the finale, like it'll save the ship in the finale. The Grappler thing was a nod to the Lower Decks crossover too.
Yeah,
they didn't mention Enterprise here, but it's obviously
right.
So Guji is now back on the Cerritos as essentially original Badgey, the original idea of Badgey.
Right. Well, I thought it was so funny because sort of how Rutherford saves the day is because Mariner reminds him of something Tandy said, which is science is messy, and I love it when you stick with it, even when it doesn't work the way you want it. Except that's exactly what he does with Guji, and everybody gets the hell out of there because they don't want him to stick with it, even when it doesn't work the way that he wanted.
Yeah, but he is treating him like a person, although he doesn't want him to call him father, because that was the thing that he was saying. I should have treated you more like a son than a experiment or something like that, or a project.
Right, but we already saw Guji glitch and then reset. So getting the hell out was a good call.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're going to have Guji go evil, because that's just like, that's dipping into the well too many times. They've already done it. They don't need to do that again. I doubt we'll see. I mean, maybe we'll see Guji, but probably not, because you got to bring Jack back, and it's a whole thing.
It is. Well, they certainly made maximum use of his talents in this episode.
Indeed, I could see Badgey coming back, like saving the day, because he's got his own universe. Maybe he's omniscient and godlike now, and can save them anytime if the koala allows.
Right.
Yes. Because the koala is even more godlike.
Did you ever think you'd catch yourself saying things like, the koala is even more godlike than Badgey?
The new Badgey.
Look what Lower Decks has done to us.
I mean, how does things work in the super being hierarchy, the Metrons and the Q and the koala, like is someone in charge, or, who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. There were I did think the dialogue was really good in this episode, and there were a lot of like one-liners that cracked me up. And then the next one would come like it was good pile-on, I thought, of good dialogue. From like, I loved when they're watering the garden and Agama says, "Taste wet sustenance," and then has the maniacal laugh after that because his drones are doing that. Or they say like when Badgey is booping the Cerritos, he's going boop,
right,
boop, and then Shaq says, "We can't take any more boops." And Rutherford says, "I can't let Badgey boop my friends to death."
I liked Lord Tyrannochilicus, which is a great name.
Yes.
What I have come to understand is when it comes to organics, what I really need to subjugate is my feelings.
Yeah. Yeah, there's just a lot of good small stuff just squished together in this episode. And a mention of a root beer float, although they didn't call it a floaty.
No.
But I like that root beer floats are kind of a Star Trek drink now.
I love root beer floats.
Me too.
Who doesn't? We haven't talked about the season arc yet. So I'm just, is there...
Well, as a good segue into that, I'd like to talk about the Bynars. Because, first of all, it was fun to see them again. I love that the captain's chair is basically like a little mini sofa because you have to put two people on it.
Well, let me ask you about that, because they did the usual thing where they start off with the lower deckers, but they wanted there to be 3 lower deckers. So there was a trio, which we haven't seen before, of Bynars who then go from the lower decks up to the bridge, like we've seen with some of these other ships. And I was just confused by that because anyway, doesn't matter. It's just a side note of why there was there a trio, because everywhere else on the ship they were paired up.
They're in pairs.
Yes.
I'm hoping there's a subtitled version of all of their dialogue.
Right. The version you and I watched, I mean, I thought that was part of the gag, is we're getting, because they've shown us the scene so many times with the Romulans and the Klingons and the Orions, that it's now a pattern of, you have for the lower deckers, they have gripes about the captain, there's an alert, they go up to the bridge, they see the mystery ship, and boom. It was exactly that pattern, except all very fast and with Bynars.
Right. So when we get because we have screeners which don't have captions. So either we'll look at the captions and see if they actually have any, or someone like Yerk is going to go and somehow translate it.
I don't know if because there's no basis. There's no Rosetta Stone, I think.
I know, but he's managed to figure out all kinds of stuff.
Binary, I mean, I guess, if they are, I mean, that would show if they really are speaking in binary, but but then they would be saying very short things, because binary, it takes a long time to say hello in binary, would be very long. So it would not be a lot of dialogue. That's for sure. So that was certainly fun. And now everyone knew about the Bynar attack. The Federation knew. They were being set to investigate it, which they thought was, we're in the big time, but it turned out it's just because they were the closest.
Which is the premise of many an original series and Next Generation episode.
Yeah, you're the only ship in the sector, which I always try to say, really?
It's got to be you. There's
Where
nobody
are all the
else.
ships? Especially around Earth. Literally the only ship around Earth. Like, how's that even possible? Come on, it's Star Trek trope. So now, I guess, in episode 7, this is now moving to the front burner, because Boimler's whole thing, the whole episode, is to lead Agamas on, because maybe he really does have intel, and he did, which we learned at the end, is he had a recording of the Bynar ship, and it was not being destroyed.
Yep, and they're not dead.
They're being stolen.
So who's stealing them?
I don't know. Our theory was they weren't being killed, they were being transported to go to like a prison. This is kind of the same thing, except they're stealing the ships and leaving a few pieces behind.
Right. There's like debris behind, but it's not the whole ship. Because I think at the beginning they said the Bynar ship disappeared.
Right.
Yeah.
But so the big white light is a tractor beam.
Yep.
Is what it is. I don't know if they leave the pieces behind or if it shakes some pieces loose. Right.
Some kind of crazy transporter, maybe. Who knows?
And I think this makes sense because it would just be horrific for all these people to have been killed. It's a more fun comedy story if
Yeah.
Someone's capturing them for some funny reason, and then it all works out in the end. And especially because we knew some of these people, we knew the Klingons, so they're not dead. But yeah, I have no idea, because some of the leading suspects were in this episode. Agamus,
Right.
Peanut
Badgey.
Hamper. Yeah. Although Badgey was working with the Drukmani to do a little scavenging.
Well, working with is a nice way of putting it.
Yeah, exactly. He had taken over. I love the Drukmani captain, like as soon as he calls them, what did he say? Like the evil triangle is
Yes, the demon triangle.
Yeah. So the most obvious suspect in my mind is William Boimler, the transporter clone of Brad Boimler, who was on the Titan and Section 31. It's who else could it be?
And the fake story about how he died was that it was neurocene gas.
Yeah, which was used again in this episode. There's 3 more episodes to sort that out, so I doubt we'll get the answer next week, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine for waiting for the end. I hope we still, this was a very smart way of bringing that story more forward, because they talked about the Binars a lot during the episode and the attack, but it was still about Badgey and Rutherford and their stories, and then the Boimler Agamus Tendi story.
I have a question about a very tiny detail.
Okay.
But I know you always have answers for these things, so I'm going to throw it at you.
I hope so.
So it's so minor. But when the grappler gets Tendi and she slips out of her top and she's wearing a tank top, and then Mariner says, "Let's go replicate you a new top before the briefing." And I'm like, do they only have one uniform? And then they just throw it in and reconstitute it every time? Like, wouldn't you have a pile of them?
We've seen that on DS9 and people packing stuff. So yes,
I was like, she didn't have one new top.
it's a good nitpick. But maybe Tendi is weird that way, where she refuses to keep one. Yeah, because like, do they do laundry on ships, or do they just?
Well, they must, because they bring some of their regular clothes. Like, they have clothes that they must bring that they can wear for fun. Like, everyone has like a favorite jacket or something they might bring for their leisure days.
Yes, but for their uniforms, do you need to clean them, or do you just replicate new ones every time?
I don't know which uses more of the ship's power.
Who knows? In the post-scarcity world of Star Trek, laundry may be irrelevant.
Wow. Wouldn't that be nice?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But no, I don't really have an answer for that one. I think that's all I've got for this episode. It was fun, funny, good character development for Boimler. I mean, for
Meat
good
pipe.
Character development for Rutherford.
Yes.
Mostly.
I thought for Boimler too, like Boimler has learned. Like, he is not the jumpy fellow that would have dealt with Agamus the way that he did.
Exactly. As he said, it's Lieutenant J.G. Meat Pipe now.
Exactly.
And he was in charge of that whole situation from beginning to end.
Yep.
Yeah, he's definitely showing strength there. And Tendi and Mariner were both good supporting characters.
Yeah.
The bridge crew really had nothing to do this episode.
Except panic.
Panicking, a little some yelling. Did Ransom say a single word? I can't remember.
He did in the briefing.
Oh, that's right. But yeah, this wasn't their episode, which is fine.
No. All right. Well, I think that's it for this one.
All right. Let's do some bits.
What you got?
Well, I'm going to cheat. My bit has nothing to do with Star Trek unless you can. Well, it's just that I've been excited. One of my interests is space stuff. And OSIRIS-REx was a sample return mission to an asteroid, the first time that's ever been done by NASA. And this week they revealed the contents and they revealed building blocks of life. It's just really exciting. And our friend Kayla, she works around, she's not working with the space rocks, but she's knows the people who are, and she's in the same building as they are. And she's super excited about it. And, because there's been a lot of news this week and this is important stuff. Just this week, a asteroid is going to pass between the Earth and the moon, just zip by. So it's only a matter of time before Earth gets hit by an asteroid. So the more we learn about them, and by hit by an asteroid, I mean again, obviously.
Right.
Just some fun science. So check out what's going on with Osiris Rex and those people doing really strange new worlds, science, cool stuff. I'm sure most of them are Star Trek fans too.
Yeah, that's cool.
What's your thing?
My thing is, it is about Star Trek, sort of. LeVar Burton was on Mark Maron's podcast a couple of weeks ago. And I love the way Mark Maron interviews people because you just get a different conversation from the one that you always have. And, you know, it didn't focus a lot on Star Trek, and there was some roots talk because it was such a formative thing. But he also just talked about like that sort of middle phase of his career. Like, I think Mark Maron at one point goes, "What was it like doing all those Love Boat episodes?" Like, you know, and he talked about how LeVar said when he was a kid, like Sammy Davis Jr., who he really looked up to, offered him all of his suits. Like, he offered him a bunch of suits. And LeVar would regret, because he was a kid and he needed suits and he was skinny and whatever. And he wishes he'd taken him up on it because then he'd have them. And he was very honest about how he felt about not getting the Jeopardy gig and how he came to terms with it. Like, he thought he'd be so good at it, and then he thought he sucked, and he talked about having imposter syndrome. So I think it's a good listen and different from the normal interviews that you might hear with LeVar, who's had such a fascinating life and known everybody and met everybody.
Yeah, when Star Trek The Next Generation launched, he was probably the most famous person on the show.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, because he had a substantial career before that and after. So he's a fascinating guy, and so many different aspects to it. I just love LeVar Burton.
Yeah, me too. I mean, and just a thing I heard when he was on Andy Richter's podcast a while ago was that Roots was his first audition.
Crazy.
Which is crazy. And then he was talking to Mark Maron about it. He said, really, I was in like a couple of episodes and that's it. And I'm still Kunta Kinte to this day.
Yeah, I mean, when you think of Roots, you think of him when...
It was really John Amos who played the character probably for longer.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder how John Amos felt about that.
And by the way, if you haven't seen Roots, you should find Roots and see it. This was when I was a kid. This was such a big deal. But I rewatched it a couple of years ago, and it's still incredible.
Back when miniseries were king.
Yep.
In the 70s.
Exactly.
All right. So that's it for another episode of All Access Star Trek. When you come back next week, we'll have Laurie's news from Comic-Con, Episode 8 of Lower Decks, and whatever else pops up.
See you then.